Good evening, and welcome to this edition of Danbury Dems. I'm Gene Eriquez, the guest host this evening, subbing for John Goliatino, your regular host. With us this evening is our special guest, State Representative from the 138th District, and the Assistant Majority Leader, which represents the western part of the city of Danbury, the northern part of Richfield, and the southern part of New Fairfield. State Representative Ken Gucker. Ken, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And out of the gate, I want to congratulate you, along with other state representatives from our area and certainly from our city, of which we can be proud, that the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters recently came out with their 2019 scorecard based upon your record in voting in support of environmental issues of concern to all of us here within our communities and certainly within the state of Connecticut as a whole. And you got an A+ rating from the league, and that's a wonderful attribute and something that we can be proud of as you represent all of us from Danbury, New Fairfield, and Richfield in our state capital in Hartford. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. You know, it's great getting that kind of recognition from them, not only from the Connecticut district, but also from the national district, where they picked out 30 states in the country, Connecticut being one of them. And of course, when you get to the Connecticut page, there's myself at the podium, along with some of my colleagues arguing about environmental issues. And being part of the Environment Committee was one of the few committees I actually asked to be on and happy to be on, because many people have known me for a number of years, know I'm a big environmentalist, you know, goes along with the Eagle Scout stuff, and you know, it's very rewarding to actually get that kind of rating.
Absolutely. Well, I know for years prior to your election as a state representative, you were involved in many environmental issues involving Candlewood Lake, Ball Pond in New Fairfield, and certainly a bunch of environmental issues and land use issues here within the city of Danbury. And we thank you for your activism and your involvement in those areas. And certainly you've delivered, as you said you would, when you went to the state capitol and went to Hartford to represent all of us. And this recognition of your record speaks for itself. So congratulations, and thank you for your support in protecting our environment and our quality of life here within Western Connecticut. I know as we're ending this year of 2019, happy holidays, certainly a great, all the blessings to you and your family for all that the season has to offer. But as we end this year, I'd like you to recap perhaps the accomplishments, maybe some of the highlights and even disappointments of 2019 through the last legislative session in Hartford. Ken, as you know, is a state representative representing one of the 3 or 4 state representative districts that have comprise a majority of the city of Danbury, but also include some of our surrounding communities as well. And certainly Ken has been representing us well in his tenure there. And in 2020, the new session begins. So we're going to talk about the end of 2019 and what was accomplished in that session and some of your goals and objectives and hopes for the 2020 session, which I know will begin in February.
Maybe it'll start even sooner. We may be going into special session. I've got notice today that we may be going in another week and a half or so. I have a feeling it's to do with how we're going to deal with our infrastructure problems, how we're going to deal with our road issues. But what's been very interesting with being part of the delegation is that because now we have a full Democratic delegation, we have more clout and more power up in Hartford. We're able to get things done. You know, for a long time, Hartford has thought that Connecticut ended at Waterbury, and we had no representation here. But with the last election, with the number of people that had come out to vote and the amount of new freshmen that had come in, I think it's one of the largest freshman classes that they've had. We have been able to get a lot of positive things done, and being a good, cohesive Danbury delegation, we're able to have a lot of clout when it goes to speaking to going to speak to the Speaker of the House or speaking to whoever we need to talk to up there to get things done, because we're one unified voice.
Right. It's nice to be in the majority. And yes. I think that's the point that Ken is making. For years, certainly when I served as mayor, we did not have a majority of Democrats representing the city of Danbury or the greater Danbury area in our state legislature, in our state House of Representatives, or in our state Senate for that matter. So it's good now that we do have that delegation, which is now within the majority and can really make a difference in terms of getting things done. So congratulations, and that's a good thing. Some of the highlights of 2019.
Well, again, being an environmentalist, my my crowning achievement or my crowning bill was the invasive species bill. The invasive species bill was a way to generate over $500,000 a year with no cost to the taxpayers to be able to combat invasive species, which is a big problem we have with Candlewood Lake. As some of you may know, a number of years ago, we had one town out of the 5 that represents the Candlewood Lake Authority want to go rogue and use chemicals and diquat in the lake to deal with the milfoil issue. When the Lake Authority was pushing for a more holistic, natural approach, which was the sterile grass carp program, which has been working very well. We noticed with the combination of the deep drawdowns that they were neglecting to do for a number of years, but also the carp, we had no milfoil issue this year. But what this bill does is gives places like the Lake Authority and others the revenue that's needed to be able to combat these things, to maybe do some research, some education, to find out how we can keep this thing from happening. So I was very, very proud to be a champion on that. I was present at the bill signing. In fact, the bill is hanging on the wall of my office. It's the first bill that I was able to get signed. So that was probably the real highlight. The other things I wish we could have done more of. We were dealing with medication drugs for senior citizens. We passed it through the House. It was to give senior citizens more options as far as getting cheaper, not cheaper quality, but less expensive medication to help with what we heard during the election, which was prescription drugs are just too expensive. That got through the House. Sadly, it didn't get through the Senate. We're hoping that this year we can further that push and finally get it through and give some relief to those who need prescription drugs and have no choice but to get the drugs that they need.
And speaking of seniors, Ken, I know one of the issues that people maybe need to be more aware of is the additional tax that was placed on certain foods that are purchased in a grocery store, for example. Can you explain what the benefit of that is to seniors in particular who receive Social Security?
So what we were able to do, a lot of people talked about they wanted to call it a grocery tax. It wasn't a grocery tax. It was actually a 1% increase on prepared foods that were already being taxed. It was nothing new being added to the mix. It was to generate a little bit of revenue, but the reason why we were trying to generate that revenue was because part of the budget process was to make Social Security tax-free for seniors from 2019 going forward. So when you do your taxes this coming April, if you collected Social Security through the calendar year of 2019, you will be able to not have that taxed on your Social Security, on your income tax here in the state of Connecticut. Also phasing in many of the pensions that seniors rely on will also become tax-free as we move down the road.
From the Connecticut income tax.
From the Connecticut income tax.
And that's what that 1% additional tax on certain food products being sold was intended to do, to provide that offset, to provide that relief to seniors or people who receive pensions, graduated into actually not paying for any Connecticut state income tax on their Social Security or on certain pensions.
Exactly, and that is to help seniors be able to stay in their houses, be able to stay in Connecticut. Every little bit helps. I mean, when you go up to, say, a town like New Fairfield that I represent, they have a large senior population. You have a lot of people on fixed incomes that this is the only thing that they have coming in. And then when you have to pay income tax on top of it, you now have to choose between, do I buy more groceries, do I heat my house, do I pay my electric bill? This hopefully will add some relief to give them the opportunity to be able to stay here in Connecticut.
People love when there's an opportunity to realize no increase in taxes or a tax benefit such as this one. I'm sure a lot of people who receive pensions, and certainly those who receive Social Security, will be grateful as they do their tax to realize that that portion of their income is not going to be taxed in the state of Connecticut any longer. So that's a welcome addition.
It's one of those positive things you don't really hear about. You hear the negative, you hear we're being taxed, but when you really look at the structure of why certain things are being taxed and the reasoning why, it becomes more palatable. Plus, I have, like I've said for years, I don't mind paying more if it helps my community, it helps my town. In this case, it helps senior citizens be able to stay here in Connecticut.
That's great. The issue of tolls obviously was a big issue in 2019. I think your position, that of pretty much most of the, if not all, of the representatives from the greater Danbury area and Danbury delegation have a similar position, and yours is the same, correct?
Yes. No on tolls. What I've asked the governor, and I've said to the governor's a personal friend of mine, I've said you need to come out with a plan, you need to stick to the plan, and you need to sell it to the people. From what we're seeing, where things keep changing every other minute, it makes it difficult. But at this particular time, the entire Danbury delegation is against the toll idea. We need to look at other reasons why we're where we're at. Now, there's this constant thing that's being pushed that, well, you're just going to raid the fund anyway. Well, the transportation fund has not been raided since 2003. Even though they keep saying we're raiding it. In fact, there were some postings putting up showing a random post of one of the votes that we all took here in Danbury to where they tried to make it sound like here you are raiding it again, which was not the case. We actually have been taking money out of the general fund and putting it into the special transportation fund to make up for when they raided it back in 2003.
And we need, obviously, a healthy transportation fund to be able to meet the infrastructure needs in the state. Obviously, major enhancements need to be made to rail, to our highways, to our bridges, to our roadways, to be able to maintain strong economic growth and potential development. Your transportation network is critical. It's a critical component of any economic plan.
Well, it's one of the biggest things that we hear when people talk about GE left Connecticut because of taxes. GE did not leave Connecticut because of taxes. GE left because we didn't have the infrastructure that they wanted or needed. They wanted an intellectual property. They wanted to be closer to MIT, Harvard, places of that sort. But also, driving to Hartford every other day, you quickly realize how you can't get from here to there. And especially once you get past the center of the state, there is no straight roads going anywhere. If you want to go to the north corner or down to Groton, there's really no straight way to get there. So those are the things that we need to look at. We need to make our transportation more efficient. We need to repair. We have failing bridges throughout the state, and we need to deal with these problems.
Right. So that is what the reason for the discussion about tolls has been as a potential source of revenue to be able to help the transportation fund meet those needs. Recognize that it's obviously faced opposition on both sides of the aisle in the state, and I know the governor has changed the plans and is now looking at maybe trucks only, but people are concerned that if you impose a toll for trucks, eventually it's going to add to cars. And nonetheless, I think people in Danbury and the greater Danbury area should know and rest assured that our delegation has been firmly opposed to tolls and the addition of tolls as a source of revenue, trying to find other means and ways to be able to address the infrastructure needs of our state. Locally, though, Ken, before we transition into 2020 and talk about some of your goals and objectives for the next session, obviously education's been a major issue. It's been a major issue in two of the towns in particular that you represent, Danbury and New Fairfield. Danbury slid to dead last in the state of all 169 cities and towns in terms of funding per pupil education, in terms of per pupil expenditures. New Fairfield's had issues with their condition of their buildings, and you can address both of those issues because I know you've been intimately involved in both. But people need to understand that the state of Connecticut and the state legislature and our delegation has indeed brought additional dollars to the city of Danbury to be able to meet our educational needs and not be in a position where we are dead last in terms of funding in the entire state of Connecticut regarding our per pupil expenditures.
I mean, constantly you hear about here in Danbury, we've had an overpopulation problem in our schools now for a long time. I have not had any children in school for over 10 years, and it was bad 10, 12 years ago. The schools were bursting at the seams then. Many of the issues that I fought against with some of these high-density housing projects that we put in, my concerns was always what was going to happen to the schools. What was going to be the effect of the school systems? Where are we going to put these kids? I mean, a number of years ago, we had 13 acres of land on the west side that was given to the city to be used for whatever we like as part of the deal with the reserve issue. And it was sold off because we needed to balance our budget. And at that time, I spoke up and said, look, we need to hold on to this land because we may need it to build a school. This west side is growing tremendously. But it got sold, and now we're seeing in this 2020 review that the Board of Education is doing now that we need to find a place to put a school. And I'm thinking, well, we had a place, we got rid of it. But as far as the state delegation, we have brought more money back. We brought an extra 2.5% back. The ECS formula was increased by an extra 2.5% across the board. Danbury saw an increase of this year of $2.7 million for education on top of what we were getting. And next year we'll see another $2 million on top of this. So we got a $4.7 million boost back to our education system. I know the leadership in Danbury likes to say that Hartford's not doing enough. Well, we keep bringing more and more in, but we see that it's just not being spent where I think it would be. Now in New Fairfield, they have a different problem. Their problem was their buildings were aging and falling apart. I know because I went to them all quite a long time ago, and they were not good 40 years ago, and they're not much better now. The New Fairfield High School, from the moment it was built, should have been torn down. You know, it opened in 1975. 1976, they did a survey of the building and found out that this building is in really bad shape, and yet it was only a year old. Why? Because it was built with faulty materials. It was built on the cheap, and now they're paying the price for that. Consolidated School's the second school that needs to be replaced. It was built in 1940 with addition after addition after addition. It's an old wood structure on a cinder block foundation that is falling apart. So with working with the delegation in New Fairfield, we were able to get it up in referendum. We were able to get the reimbursement rates actually raised because unfortunately New Fairfield only has a reimbursement rate of 28%. We were able to get it up to 38% on the consolidated school building, but then the high school still will be fully reimbursed at 28% in a new location, 2 brand new buildings. So when I hear here in Danbury that we need a new school, but we can't get a shovel in the ground for 5 years, I'm like, wait a minute. I just helped get 2 new schools in New Fairfield. They will be open in 3 years. So if the New Fairfield can do it, we should do it here in Danbury. We need to build more schools. We need to look at where we can put them, look at where our population, and we also need to control maybe some of this high density housing that we're putting in. And then we also should look at these 7-year tax abatements that are going out to some of these projects. I mean, right now you've got, I believe, around 40 kids that are going to the Kennedy Flats apartments that we were told would have no children in it. Those kids cost $13,000 a year to go to school. We're not collecting any revenue.
Unfortunately, Danbury is not spending $13,000 a year per student. If we were, we wouldn't be dead last in the state. But nonetheless, you're right. Your point is well taken. And you know, not only do we need to look at and identify some raw land that might be available for the development of schools to be able to lower class sizes, to be able to address the overcrowding issue, but we ought to look at some of the available buildings that maybe could be retrofit to be able to accommodate schools, even if they're of a smaller scale, to be able to meet our neighborhood needs. You know, Danbury is a large city in terms of geographic area, as 44 square miles in size. So we have that opportunity, and I think we need to address it effectively and once and for all address this overcrowding issue and better meet the needs of the students of the city of Danbury, and better, as you said, fund our budget so that indeed the allocations, additional allocations this year and next year coming from the state of Connecticut are applied to the Danbury Public Schools so that they can benefit from additional paraprofessionals helping some of our students and our teachers within the classrooms, and lowering the class sizes and addressing the overcrowding issue at Danbury High School, perhaps our middle schools, and perhaps as the need will arise for elementary schools. I know regionalization is an issue that's talked about, but people move to Danbury and they tell me all the time because they want to send their children to Danbury schools. Mm-hmm. If they wanted to move to Brookfield, for example, they would have moved to Brookfield to send their children to school there. So I think we need to address our own issues here at home. And yes, there's always a need, and it's wise to look at the opportunity for people that border surrounding communities within our city if there's a way of finding some efficiencies and effectiveness in cost sharing. But we need to address our issues here at home first.
Well, there is a program out there that I believe the funds will be available next year. We weren't able to get it into this year's budget, which is called School Choice. And school choice would allow children that live on the bordering ends of Danbury to be able to go to surrounding schools. So maybe with a town like New Fairfield that's building 2 brand new schools where their class size is decreasing and they're worried about how to fill classrooms, maybe we can send some kids up there. I know Sherman does that right now, where Sherman does not have a high school, so their children either go to New Fairfield or they go to New Milford.
Well, I'm old enough to remember when New Fairfield students went to Danbury High School before New Fairfield High School was built. So, but that would be a voluntary program, is that correct?
Yes. So right now, the way it's set up is we're supposed to have a schedule, I think $400,000 put aside for that. And what's different with school choice as opposed to, say, a charter school is that we don't lose the ECS credits that we have now.
And ECS, for our viewers, is the education cost-sharing formula, which is the way the state determines how much money each municipality will get to meet their educational needs within their communities.
Exactly. And with that, we would not lose the ECS formula or credit that we have, so we would not be negatively impacted. Plus, the state throws in some extra dollars to help the surrounding town absorb some of the costs of the education so that we get the benefit of not having to worry about a larger building at this point, but we can look at it and say, okay, we can maybe send some kids to Ridgefield. We could send some kids to New Fairfield. We might be able to send some kids, bordering towns, not not like the mayor had suggested, let's send them to Brookfield, or where nobody really wants to be on the bus for an hour.
Right. Well, that Brookfield Elementary School is not going to be offline until the new one's built, and that's probably in 2022. As you said, it takes about 3 years to build a school, not 5, as has been suggested in some circles. So,
yes.
But I think those are solutions that need to be looked at. We need to look at doing business differently than we've done in the past, perhaps, in order to be able to meet the needs of communities, because they change. And Danbury's situation today may be very different 20 years from now, and some of our surrounding communities may have that burdening, and burgeoning, I should say, growth within their school system. So, putting systems in place where there is that opportunity may be beneficial in the long term.
Oh, absolutely. And I think partnering with our state colleges, helps. Partnering with, Abitech, maybe pick up some of that stuff. I mean, we have a lot of great opportunities here. It's just a matter of being able to take effective advantage of them. Right.
For a couple of minutes, can you talk about some of your goals and objectives as we head into and look forward to 2020, which is right around the corner, and the legislative session, which begins in February this year in 2020?
So, we have a number of priorities. What hamstrings us a little bit this year is that the bills that we put forward have to be committee bills, and they have to be impact the budget somehow. I would like to see, like I spoke of earlier, that prescription plan go through. I think if we can convince the Senate to take it up, I know the House will probably push it through again, because we did vote through it last time pretty unanimously. That would help a lot of people. Some of the environment bills that died again, dealing with polystyrene containers, dealing with some of the herbicides that are being used on lawns that are now finding their ways into our watersheds and into our streams and lakes, causing negative problems. Like to see some of those bills get through. I had a bill in the banking committee, which I also serve on, which helped people with foreclosure issues. I think we need to really push some progressive ideas to help people be able to stay in town, be able to afford to live here, and if they have some problems, maybe the state's able to give them some help to get through them. Show that we're compassionate.
Right. And that's what government's there to do. It's to serve people, to be able to help people meet their needs. Obviously, it can't do everything for everyone and be everything for everyone, but we need to do our best in terms of trying to meet, in particular, the priority needs to keep our communities sound, safe, and secure from a financial perspective. So appreciate you and applaud your efforts in that regard. Any other particular highlights locally? Obviously, I'm sure you're going to be overseeing what will transpire in New Fairfield as it pertains to the progression of that school development, the school's development there, and certainly what will be happening in Danbury with the expenditure of the allocations that you've made at the state to Danbury's public schools. So any other priorities in 2020?
I think schools would be number one right now. So overseeing what happens in New Fairfield, being that I was a very loud voice in New Fairfield on that issue. I want to make sure that those schools are done properly, so we're not going to be replacing them, that state money is being well spent for a good quality product that will be there for a while. But here in Danbury as well, after sitting down with the Board of Education, I think the entire delegation is dedicated into helping Danbury with their school overcrowding issues. You know, as we see with the fights that were breaking out and some of the other problems, that we need more support. You know, we need help. I'd love to see the Marjorie Trail finally become a fruition. That's a project that would not only help New Fairfield, but help Danbury with passive recreation. So many of the things that we were fighting for last year, it's basically Act 2, Scene 2, and let's see if we can get them done this year.
That's great. So obviously a 2-year session for our state representatives and our state senators here within the state of Connecticut, and 2020 will be another election year. But there's a lot more work to be done in the 2020 session before you get into that campaign mode in 2020 for November, I'm sure. For people who you represent, your contact information, email address, the best way that they can contact you.
Best way, just go on the State of Connecticut's website. You can find all of our emails there. Basically, it's our first name with cga.gov.com. After it, I'm very approachable. Look me up on Facebook. Look me up on my websites. I'm constantly talking to people. I'm very accessible.
You have to keep moving around, and you know, Ken has mentioned at the outset of the program that part of his environmental record comes from his background and training, certainly through scouting and being an Eagle Scout. I can tell you can find Ken helping people at all times, being at the side of the road because their car broke down or if a tree came across the road. The kind of person you are, we're delighted to be able to have you as an elected representative representing all of us here in the state of Connecticut and Western Connecticut, and certainly in the city of Danbury. In towns in New Fairfield and Richfield, I know are fortunate as well. So with that, just want to thank you for being our guest tonight.
Thank you.
Look forward to a great end of the year and a very happy new year and a great success in 2020.
Thank you.